I'm going to say a little bit about the inspiration for this next exercise experiment that we're going to be doing. Of course, Violet is the ultimate inspiration, but the thing I'm speaking of in particular is a short piece that she wrote a long time ago called The Many Faces of Anger. And I'm just going to quickly put in the chat window, or maybe Karen, maybe you could do that. Just if you want to see the article, The Many Faces of Anger, it's at vsof.org. And if you go to the resources section, it's there. And it's not very long. I'm sure it can Google Translate well if you want to access it in your own language. And briefly, what this article is about, this essay is about, is that anger is often the most misunderstood and the least tolerated of feelings, and that it can present itself in a variety of ways. And it can be kind of confusing for people of all ages to identify and express their anger as well as other feelings. And Karen, I'm going to want to show my screen and probably need to be co-host or something to get to the breakout rooms. Okay, great. So hopefully this will be as seamless as possible. Let's see how it goes here. I've got a lot of things up on my screen. So briefly, those of you who have trained with me, you'll recognize something that I often refer to as a chemistry formula. I can get rid of this, if I can get this open. Okay. So, you know, Violet always says that there's only 2 reasons people come into therapy, which I quote quite a lot. And that's that we're not making good contact in some way, that we're not fully present, and that we're struggling to have a strong sense of self, that we're not knowing ourselves very well, or have kind of a fragile or diffuse sense of self. And that there are basically 4 ways that we can make contact with the body, our 5 senses, emotion, and cognition, intellect. So today we're going to talk about emotion, just briefly. So one of the things I share with my clients, often in the first session, is I propose a metaphor about feelings. And I share that most of the people who come in to see me, they're not feeling very good. They're having some problems with their bodies or relationships or their emotions or behavior. And it's usually because they're not feeling good. Maybe they don't even know why or what it's all about. But it's often related to emotion, that they're having difficulty identifying and expressing their emotions somehow. And I give some examples, you know, that sometimes people come in because they're having lots of anxiety, and that could present in different ways with their behavior in their bodies somehow, or having some kind of panic attacks. And I will invite the child to, and really anyone in the room, to think about a restaurant, a favorite restaurant, and that they have the opportunity to go into the kitchen. And when they are in the kitchen, they notice a giant sink about the size of a sofa. Usually they're sitting on a sofa with their parents. I can say it's as big as that sofa that you're all sitting on. And imagine that coming off the wall, you see 4 spouts, 4 faucets. And if that doesn't translate well, I'll share this drawing now. So this is something that one of my students did for me. I think she got tired of seeing me draw faucets that looked like penises. So she tried to help me out with this and do some faucets for me. And so you can have a template like this, or you can just ask children to draw a faucet. And what I'd like you to do now is to think about how your faucets work. Whether your sad faucet is gushing, maybe you've had some big losses recently, or maybe you've been having a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety. Maybe there's some things you've been angry about, frustrated about, irritated about. And the idea with this exercise is that we're going to draw kind of how our faucets are working right now in terms of the COVID-19 crisis that we're all in the midst of. And you have lots of options for how you might want to do this drawing. You could draw just how you're feeling today about this drama that we find ourselves in. You could draw how you feel in general about what's been happening for the last 4, 6, 8 weeks, however long you've been directly impacted by this. And so what I'd like you to do is just for a few minutes, take a piece of paper, draw some faucets, and see what the flow of your faucets looks like. And again, you can do this however you want. You can draw your internal experience that may not match your external expression. However, it seems the most interesting and supportive for you. Go ahead and take about 3 or 4 minutes just to show how your faucets are flowing. Okay, so I'm going to have you work in breakout rooms just for about 8 minutes or so. So you're going to work in pairs, and you'll just have about 4 minutes each to share what you want to share. And again, as always, we're not doing therapy, we're not interpreting or analyzing or trying to figure anybody out. We're just listening to whoever we're working with share what feels supportive for them to share. And so I'm not hosting, Karen is hosting, so I'm gonna just tell her how to go ahead and do this. So if you go to breakout rooms, you'll have the option for a random assignment, and you're gonna have just put 2 people in a room, and it will just divide everybody up. And if there's an odd number, there'll be 1 group with 3 people. And when you hit the button to go into breakout rooms, everyone's gonna go into the breakout room. And then we'll let you know when 4 minutes has gone by, so when it's time to change to the next person. And then you'll also have 1 minute at the end to wrap up before we all get sort of zoomed back into one large group. Are you seeing that, Karen?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so I'm going to create them. And
I've been using breakout rooms a lot with my class that I teach at Antioch University. And I only have 13 people in my class. So this was kind of a challenge to try this with 80 people. Normally, if you are using Zoom and you're doing some training groups, the breakout room function is really, really amazing and helpful. And anyway, more about the technology another day. So those of you who've trained with me, you know these faucets, you've done these faucets and are probably using them quite a lot with your clients. And there's a lot of ways to give clients the freedom to express and identify their emotions this way. And I wanted to just go ahead and share a couple of faucet drawings that I did yesterday, just so you can kind of see the variety. And so let me go ahead and do that now. I'll get back to my desktop, and I think there's probably a better way to do this, but so I'll start with this drawing. So this was from a client that I was working with yesterday, and she's 13, and we'd never done faucets before, and we were just kind of doing this together on the whiteboard. And we did it a little differently, she drew the faucets, and then with the text feature, I kind of put the names of them, and then she just again, used the drawing feature to kind of show the flow of her faucets and to help her make some more self-statements and have some more sense of self and make more contact with what was happening with her emotionally during this time. I played scribe, which is something that Violet talks about a lot, which I find to be a very I-thou kind of thing to do, to give a child my full attention and be writing down verbatim what she was saying. So she said she was sad about online school, that she was sad about being bored. TMI means that she's been hearing too much information, and a lot of it makes her sad. Both of her parents are physicians, one of whom is working at the hospital. It's quite a serious kind of family. And so the material that she's hearing from the news and from her parents is heavy and making her feel sad, of course. She's angry because she feels like the teacher's approach at her school is too much, too difficult, there's too much work. She's angry because she feels like in the beginning of the crisis that her parents were really overreactive, and it was frustrating for her that they were completely focused on sort of the catastrophe, and that she felt like they were insensitive to how it was impacting her. She's angry about her schoolwork being too much. She's angry about, she talked about all the businesses in Santa Barbara where we live, and she's worried and angry that they're going to be gone, that there's going to be a lot of loss coming, and that she's thinking a lot about how frustrating it's going to be when many things are closed. Her fear was about that she's high risk, being the daughter of someone who's working in a hospital. She's scared about accidentally spreading the virus, that she might be asymptomatic, that she's worried about her older family and friends. She's scared about what's going to happen afterwards, getting back to however things are going to be and all these unknowns. She's afraid of what I would call trauma, that there's going to be a lot of horrible things and that they're going to keep playing over and over again on the news. And she's scared about how traumatic and how bad that's going to feel to keep hearing all this news. She's happy, as Claire talked about last weekend, she's happy about not being around people. She's happy that the school days are shorter and there's less waiting around in between classes. And she's happy that she has less social interaction and obligations. She's quite happy to be away from other kids. So now I don't know how to get to the next thing, so I have to stop sharing and then start sharing. I have to find a better way. Go back to my desktop to share the next one. So here's this one. This was with a much younger child. This gal is 8. She's in a combined classroom of 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. Prior to the crisis, she's had an enormous amount of anxiety about school. So we were playing around. She drew these faucets and then just kind of color coded them. And they all seem to be about the same in terms of the flow. So we spent most of our session going into detail about about what's making her happy, angry, sad, and afraid. And I found this really interesting because the words almost look like a flow to, where typically this is a gal who anger and fear are the faucets that are the most active for her in all circumstances. And this situation with COVID-19 was mirroring that typical presentation for her. So she was happy at first about not going to school. She's thankful for Zoom and FaceTime, and a friend of hers who's moved out of town is moving back. That was sort of a short list of happy. Lots of issues about frustration, teachers, school, almost all of it had to do with school. If I had to diagnose this 8-year-old, I would say that she generally has what I would call school phobia, panic, and is a perfectionist in all ways, and it creates a lot of anxiety for her. And the way her anxiety presents itself is it usually comes gushing out the anger faucet, and she has a lot of issues with behavior, mostly at home. Some other obvious things, she's sad about not seeing her friends. She can't go to her after school program. And she was starting to make some progress with her mornings. She was having a difficulty before the crisis getting into her classroom, and it was quite a lot of drama getting her out of the home, into the car, out of the car, into the school, into her classroom. And she's sad that she's going to sort of lose some of that progress that she made and have to start all over again with that when school starts. And again, most of her fear had to do with school, not getting work done. She might get behind. But some of it was about not having, afraid that she's not going to have enough time to play. Like if she can't get her schoolwork done quickly, she's going to lose out on playtime. And then there were a few specific things about the virus itself, people getting sick, some high risk of adults in her family, and some family members who are doctors. Finally, I wanted to show a last one. And this, I have to admit, I asked my daughter to do. And she's 14. And I wanted to show something that if you don't like Zoom, if you're not comfortable using the whiteboard, if you're having a phone conversation with your client because they're in their country home, they're at their dasha, they're have a poor internet connection. So you might just be doing a session over the phone or on FaceTime or something that's not really reasonable to use Zoom's whiteboard. So you could invite someone to do a faucet, do a drawing, and then they could take a picture of it with their phone and send it to you via text. In our case, I had my daughter do this drawing. I wish I could make it bigger. There must be some way. Let's see if I can make it bigger. Is that gonna work?
It's okay, Lynn.
Okay, so just sitting here, I had her do the drawing and I asked her just to write, sort of show the flow of how she was feeling about the virus. And of course she said, well, when? It's been such a long time, it keeps changing. So I said she could do it however she wanted. So she decided to do the faucets for how she's feeling mostly now, but she wanted to do a timeline. So you can see pretty obviously how she's feeling, and she chose to color code things. But a month ago, she was scared. And then she had a long period of being mad and frustrated. And then more recently, she was sad because of some losses that have happened around here. And a close friend of ours was very, very ill, and we were afraid he might die. And this was an after-school teacher of hers who she's been very close to since she was 5 years old. And so she had this layer of fear that was kind of overriding everything. And lately, she's mostly happy with a little less fear. So I had her write down a few words for each of the feelings. So for happy, she's glad she has more time for hobbies. She's glad she has more time with me, which I appreciated. Maybe she decided to write that just because I was sitting there with her. She's sad about not being at school, some losses, sad about changes, things that she was enjoying. She's mad at the government. That might be an interject from her mother, but maybe not. She's old enough to be mad at the government, certainly at 14. She's mad about losing her social life that she really enjoyed. And she's scared about losing people who could die. And she's scared about how society might change. So some different ways to work with faucets in general and during this crisis. And I don't really have anything else to share. I guess we have time for a couple of questions, but I'll just turn it over to Karen and you can sort of guide me or the group however you see fit at this point.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. And this is such a powerful technique to get at the emotions, both identify them and then also for just about any child of just about any age, I've found, Lynn, since you've introduced it, to be able to have them access the emotions. So thank you for that, Lynn. Let's see, who had a good question? Laura, how do we help or teach children to identify their own emotions in these different categories? What would you say about that?
That's really great because this is kind of the whole point, right? Is that sometimes what we're feeling on the inside, like maybe fear or some unprocessed grief, comes gushing out that anger faucet, right? So we all have plumbing problems, and it's not a pure system of what we feel on the inside is congruent with what we're expressing on the outside. So that's kind of the point of this exercise, to see that our faucets get all mixed up, that and all we can do in the identification process is have more awareness, usually about the body. Like, how do we know what we know? How do we know when we're angry? What are the physical cues that we experience? And sometimes it's really obvious. We feel sad and tears come. You know, we feel scared and we get kind of clingy or kind of shaky, but it's not always so clear. So this is one small part of working with identifying and expressing emotions. And to me, it's a fabulous assessment tool to see just how mucked up is our plumbing. And see that in times of stress, it can get really mucked up, right? I mean, certainly for me, someone said earlier how much more work it is to work this way versus just going to our office and having all of our usual supplies and teaching our classes with real sand and, you know, in real small group settings. And it's exhausting. So when I'm tired and irritable, it's usually because I'm anxious, right? Because I'm afraid I'm running out of time. There's too much to do. I'm losing control, and it will come out as irritability. So that's the point of the faucets, really, is to help psychoeducate clients and their parents that we need to know ourselves better. And usually the quickest way is to assess what's happening with our bodies and with our words, and to see whether those things kind of match up.
Great, great. One thing that Trish asked is, do you have people process it where I am the anger faucet, I am the happy faucet? Do you ever do that, Lynn?
You know what? I don't think I have ever done that, and that's a really cool suggestion.
Yeah. It could be great.
I've had students make, yeah, I've had students make sort of installation pieces with lights and all different kinds of like art projects to sort of show faucets and how they can work. So there's so many things you can do. I had a student recently make like a picture book with sequins showing the flow of all the different faucets. So it's a pretty global metaphor that I think works for all ages. And we can reference back to it over and over again for, in general, how someone's emotional process tends to work, or for a specific situation.